So there's Commander Riley Murphy, standing in the middle of what used to be the Galactic Academy's most prestigious diplomatic simulation chamber. Now decorated with what can only be described as the remnants of 17 different alien cuisines. Purple goo dripped from the ceiling. Something that smelled like burnt socks and regret was smoking in the corner. And Riley? Well, she was grinning like she'd just discovered the secret to faster-than-light travel. "Murphy," Admiral Torres said, his voice carrying that special tone reserved for people who've just watched their career prospects explode in spectacular fashion. "Would you care to explain why the Valorian ambassador simulation is currently wearing what appears to be Andromedan pudding?" Riley wiped a blob of green something off her uniform. "Well, sir, technically speaking, I was following protocol. The manual clearly states that when faced with cultural misunderstandings, we should find common ground. And the common ground was food? Everyone eats, sir. Universal constant. Plus, turns out the Valorians have a great sense of humor once you get past all that formal diplomatic posturing." The holographic Valorian ambassador, still dripping with dessert, actually chuckled. Even the simulation programming couldn't hide the fact that Riley had somehow managed to turn a tense trade negotiation into the galaxy's messiest dinner party. Admiral Torres pinched the bridge of his nose. This was the woman who'd gotten her callsign Crash not from piloting mishaps, but from her tendency to crash through problems with all the subtlety of a meteor hitting a tea party. She'd somehow graduated top of her class in xenopsychology while simultaneously holding the record for most diplomatic incidents per semester. "Murphy, you do realize this was supposed to be a formal first contact scenario?" "Yes, sir. And I made contact. Lots of contact. The Valorian delegate even taught me a word in their language." She paused, looking pleased with herself. "I think it means delightfully unpredictable chaos bringer, but the translation matrix might need calibration." Around the room, her classmates were cleaning alien food products off their pristine uniforms. Perfect cadets who'd followed every protocol, dotted every I, crossed every T, and somehow managed to make interspecies relations about as exciting as reading tax code. Meanwhile, Riley had turned the whole thing into what looked like the universe's first diplomatic food fight, and everyone seemed to be having the time of their lives. "Sir," Riley continued, oblivious to the fact that her career was hanging by a thread thinner than Centaurian silk, "I know it didn't go exactly by the book, but—" "Murphy." The Admiral held up a hand. "The book exists for a reason. Diplomatic incidents have started wars. Entire civilizations have been wiped out because someone used the wrong greeting gesture." "Right, but sir, what if the book is wrong? What if all that formal protocol is actually making things worse? I mean, look at the simulation results. The Valorians rated this encounter as most enjoyable diplomatic exchange in 3 centuries. That's got to count for something." Torres stared at her for a long moment. In any sane universe, Riley Murphy would be shipped off to the furthest mining station they could find, somewhere she could cause diplomatic incidents only with asteroids. But these weren't sane times. Humanity was about to make first contact with the Zephyrian Empire, one of the most powerful and notoriously difficult species in the galaxy. Every other diplomatic team had failed to even get a meeting. Maybe, just maybe, what they needed wasn't someone who followed the playbook. Maybe they needed someone crazy enough to throw it out the airlock. "Murphy," he said finally, "pack your bags. You're going to the Zephyrian homeworld." Riley's eyes lit up like a kid who'd just been told Christmas came early. "Really? The Zephyrians? But sir, they're supposed to be impossible to negotiate with. Rigid, formal, completely inflexible." "Exactly." Torres smiled grimly. "Which is why I'm sending the most flexible, unpredictable, protocol-breaking officer in the entire stellar diplomatic corps." "This is either brilliant or completely insane," Riley said. "With you, Murphy, it's usually both." The Zephyrian diplomatic station hung in space like a crystal cathedral, all elegant curves and impossible architecture that seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at it. Ambassador Keth Var of the Zephyrian High Council stood in the main reception chamber, his forearms clasped behind his back in the traditional posture of patient dignity, his bioluminescent skin pattern cycling through the formal diplomatic colors. He'd been briefing himself on human customs for weeks. Rigid handshake protocols. Precise verbal formalities. The humans, according to all intelligence reports, were a species obsessed with structure and hierarchy. This should be a perfectly standard first contact, boring in all the right ways. The airlock cycled, and the human delegation stepped through. First came Captain Martinez, exactly what Kethvar had expected: crisp uniform, perfect posture, clutching a datapad like his life depended on it. Behind him scurried Dr. Pemberton, the xenobiologist, practically vibrating with nervous energy and armed with enough scanning equipment to outfit a small research station. And then came Riley Murphy. She bounced through the airlock like she was entering a party, took one look around the magnificent reception chamber, and whistled low. "Wow, this place is amazing. And those tentacle things you've got there? Absolutely fantastic. Do they glow like that all the time? Or is this like mood lighting?" Martinez made a choking sound. Dr. Pemberton dropped his scanner. Kethvar's bioluminescent patterns flickered in what could only be described as confusion. In 300 years of diplomatic service, no one had ever called his sensory appendages fantastic tentacle things. "I am Ambassador Kethvar of the Zephyrian High Council," he said, falling back on protocol. "On behalf of my people, I welcome you to..." "Riley Murphy, Professional Chaos Coordinator," Riley interrupted cheerfully, sticking out her hand. "Love what you've done with the place. Very space cathedral meets modern art museum. And seriously, can you arm wrestle with all 4 arms at once? Because that would be incredibly cool." Martinez stepped forward frantically. "Ambassador Kethvar, please accept our apologies for Commander Murphy's informal approach. What she means to say is..." "Actually, what I mean to say is exactly what I said," Riley interjected. "I'm genuinely curious about the arm wrestling thing. I bet you could take on like 6 humans at once." For a moment, the chamber was dead silent except for the gentle hum of the station's life support systems. Dr. Pemberton was quietly hyperventilating into his hands. Martinez looked like he was contemplating the feasibility of ejecting himself into space. Then something extraordinary happened. Ambassador Kethvar's bioluminescent patterns shifted from formal diplomatic blue to something that could only be described as amused green. "6 humans?" he said, and there was definitely humor in his voice. "Commander Murphy, I believe you underestimate Zephyrian's strength. I could easily handle 8. Riley's grin could have powered a small space station. "Oh, it's on now. Martinez, you hearing this? Our new friend here thinks he can take 8 of us." "Commander Murphy," Martinez hissed through gritted teeth, "we are here for formal diplomatic negotiations, not arm wrestling competitions." But Kethvar was studying Riley with open fascination. "Tell me, Commander Murphy, is this typical behavior for human diplomats?" "Honestly, not even close. Most of them are about as exciting as watching paint dry in a vacuum. But hey, life's too short to spend it being boring, right?" "Indeed," Kethvar murmured. His patterns were now cycling through colors that weren't in any diplomatic manual. "Most species approach us with excessive formality. They recite prepared speeches, follow ancient protocols, treat every interaction like a sacred ritual." "Sounds terrible," Riley said sympathetically. "No wonder you guys have a reputation for being impossible to work with. I'd be grumpy too if everyone I met acted like they were afraid I might spontaneously combust if they said the wrong thing." Dr. Pemberton made a strangled noise. This was definitely not in the first contact playbook. But Kethvar was actually laughing now, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Commander Murphy, you are either the most diplomatically gifted human I have ever encountered, or the most catastrophically unaware." "Why not both?" Riley said brightly. "I like to keep my options open." Martinez was quietly updating his resignation letter in his head, but Kethvar's patterns had shifted to what could only be described as delighted gold. "Commander Murphy," the ambassador said, "I believe this is going to be a most interesting negotiation." 3 hours later, the formal negotiation chamber had been transformed into something that definitely wasn't in the stellar diplomatic corps manual. Ambassador Kethvar sat cross-legged on the floor, his forearms arranged in a perfect square, while Riley demonstrated the ancient human art of rock, paper, scissors to a growing crowd of fascinated Zephyrians. Okay, so rock beats scissors because it's hard and can break them. Scissors beat paper because they can cut it. And paper beats rock because... Riley paused, suddenly realizing she'd never actually thought about this part. Well, because it covers the rock, I guess. Look, the logic isn't the important part. The important part is the psychological warfare. Kethvar's patterns were cycling through colors that probably didn't have names in any human language. Psychological warfare? Absolutely. You've got to read your opponent, watch their tells. Are they the type to go with rock because it seems strongest? Or are they thinking so far ahead they'll throw paper because they think you'll think they'll throw rock? Riley demonstrated with exaggerated gestures. It's all about getting inside their head. Dr. Pemberton, who had given up all pretense of maintaining scientific dignity, was frantically taking notes. Fascinating. A decision-making process based entirely on prediction of irrational behavior patterns. Exactly, Riley said. Humans excel at being irrationally rational, or rationally irrational. I can never remember which. General Thex Null, the Zephyrian military advisor, had been watching from the corner with growing concern. His species had spent centuries studying warfare patterns, predictable strategic behaviors, logical tactical decisions. These humans seemed to operate on pure chaos theory. Ambassador, he said, his patterns flashing warning orange, surely this is not representative of human strategic thinking? Riley turned to him with interest. Oh, you're military? Cool. Let me guess, you guys probably have detailed battle plans, contingency strategies, predictable response protocols? Of course. Warfare requires precision planning, adherence to proven tactical doctrines. Right. And how's that working out against enemies who do the same thing? Thex Null's patterns flickered uncertainly. We achieve acceptable casualty ratios within expected parameters. Yikes. That's the most depressing way to describe war I've ever heard. Riley sat back on her heels. Humans do it differently. We plan for everything to go wrong, then make it up as we go along. Drives our enemies crazy because they can't predict what we'll do next. That sounds terrifyingly inefficient, Thex Null said. Maybe, but it works. You know what our greatest military victory was? Some general guy decided to cross a river in winter, in boats at night during a storm, to attack an enemy who was completely sure no one would be stupid enough to try it. Captain Martinez, who had been quietly documenting every protocol violation for his eventual court-martial, looked up. Commander, that's a gross oversimplification of. The point is, Riley continued, waving him off, sometimes the best strategy is having no strategy at all. Just pure, beautiful, improvisational chaos. Kethvar's patterns had shifted to contemplative purple. This explains much about your species' rapid technological advancement. Most civilizations develop along predictable lines. But humans seem to leap sideways. We're very good at sideways, Riley agreed. It keeps life interesting. And your diplomatic approach? Thex Null asked. Is this also based on sideways thinking? Riley grinned. Mech, General, I haven't followed a single diplomatic protocol since I walked in here. And this is the longest conversation your people have had with humans in 50 years. What do you think? The general's patterns cycled through several colors that definitely indicated deep thought. Around the room, other Zephyrians were practicing rock, paper, scissors with the intensity of scholars studying ancient texts. I think, Kethvar said slowly, that humans are either the most dangerous species in the galaxy or the most useful allies we could possibly find. Again, why not both? Riley said. We're very versatile. Dr. Pemberton looked up from his notes. Commander, I think you've accidentally created the first interspecies cultural exchange in recorded history. Riley looked around the room, where Zephyrians were debating the strategic implications of paper versus rock with academic fervor, and grinned. Accidentally. Yeah, let's go with that. The next morning, Everything that could go wrong did go wrong, which in Riley's experience meant everything was proceeding exactly according to plan. Not her plan, mind you, because Riley didn't make plans. Plans were for people who thought the universe cared about their scheduling preferences. The trouble started when the translation matrix decided to have what Dr. Pemberton diplomatically called a cascading linguistic failure event. What it actually meant was that every word coming out of Riley's mouth was being translated into something completely different. And apparently the Zephyrian language had some very specific cultural contexts that the computer was spectacularly misunderstanding. So about those trade agreements. Riley was saying to the assembled Zephyrian High Council, while the translation matrix helpfully converted her words into what Ambassador Kethvar later described as a formal proposal of matrimonial bonding, with all 12 council members simultaneously, including detailed specifications for the wedding feast. The High Council's collective bioluminescent patterns went through a sequence of colors that definitely weren't in any diplomatic handbook. Martinez was making small whimpering sounds. Dr. Pemberton had gone completely pale and was frantically trying to shut down the translation system. But then Councillor Veth Nara, the eldest member of the High Council, did something unprecedented. She started laughing. Not the polite diplomatic chuckle that species use to diffuse tension, but actual, genuine, tears streaming down her face laughter. "Commander Murphy," she said, her patterns cycling through what could only be described as delighted gold. In 300 years of council service, no one has ever proposed to all of us at once. I am particularly impressed by your suggestion that we serve roasted quantum fruit at the ceremony. Riley, who had no idea what she'd supposedly said but was always ready to roll with the punches, grinned. "Well, you know what they say. Go big or go home." "Indeed," said Councillor Zethmar, his patterns flickering with amusement. "Though I must ask, what exactly did you mean by the sacred dance of the 7 moons?" Martinez had given up and was just staring at the ceiling, probably calculating how many years in military prison this would cost him. But Riley, being Riley, did what she always did when faced with the impossible. She improvised brilliantly. "Oh, that," she said with complete confidence. "It's a human tradition. Very sacred. Very moony. Moony." And then she did something that changed the course of interstellar relations forever. She told a joke. It wasn't even a good joke. It was the kind of terrible pun that made people groan and throw things. But somehow, in that moment, with the translation matrix mangling every word and the entire Zephyrian High Council waiting to see what this impossible human would do next, Riley Murphy told the worst joke in the history of diplomatic relations. "Why don't aliens ever land at airports?" she said, and paused for comedic timing. "Because they're looking for space." The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a neutrino drop. Martinez closed his eyes and started mentally composing his court-martial defense. Dr. Pemberton was quietly updating his will. Then Councillor Veth Nara made a sound that was half snort, half wheeze, and completely undignified. "Space," she repeated. "Because they are looking for space." And then something miraculous happened. The entire Zephyrian High Council erupted in laughter. Not polite diplomatic laughter, but the kind of deep, belly-shaking, tears-streaming laughter that transcends species barriers and linguistic misunderstandings and centuries of formal protocol. It turned out that Zephyrians loved terrible puns. Who knew? Koanet. "Commander Murphy," Kethvar said when he could finally speak again, "that was possibly the worst joke I have ever heard." "Thank you," Riley said proudly. "I've been working on it." "I believe," said Councillor Zethmar, wiping his eyes, "that we have found our common ground." Martinez opened one eye cautiously. "Common ground?" "Terrible humor," Veth Nara explained. "It appears that both our species share an appreciation for jokes so bad they become good again." And that was how humanity's first formal diplomatic contact with the Zephyrian Empire was saved by the worst joke in galactic history. Everything was going perfectly, which in Riley's experience was always the moment when the universe decided to test your improvisational skills. The alarm started blaring just as Councillor Veth Nara was explaining the finer points of Zephyrian humor theory. and suddenly the elegant diplomatic station was bathed in angry red light. "Incoming vessels," General Thex Null announced, his patterns flashing emergency orange. "Krillian attack fleet. Full battle formation." Riley had never heard of the Krillians, but from the way every Zephyrian in the room went pale blue with terror, she gathered they weren't coming to join the comedy club. "How long until they're in firing range?" Kethvar demanded. "In 9 minutes, 17 seconds. Martinez was already pulling up tactical displays. "What's their beef with you guys?" "The Krillians believe that any alliance between species weakens galactic purity," Thex Null explained grimly. "They have destroyed 3 diplomatic meetings in the past year." "Right," Riley said, and everyone turned to look at her with expressions ranging from hopeful to terrified. "So we've got 9 minutes to save 2 civilizations and prevent an interstellar incident. Anyone got any brilliant ideas?" Silence. The kind of silence that usually preceded very bad things happening to very good people. "Okay then," Riley continued cheerfully. "Good thing I work best under pressure. General, what kind of weapons do we have?" "This is a diplomatic station. We have minimal defensive capabilities." "What about that coffee machine in the break room? Is it still broken?" Dr. Pemberton blinked. "The coffee machine? Commander, I hardly think refreshments are our primary concern right now. Trust me. And Kethvar, that bioluminescent communication system your people use, can it broadcast on multiple frequencies simultaneously?" "Yes, but..." "Perfect. Martinez, I need you to patch the coffee machine into the station's main power grid. Dr. Pemberton, start scanning for Krillian communication frequencies. Everyone else, we're about to attempt the stupidest plan in military history." "Commander," Martinez said carefully, "what exactly are you planning?" Riley grinned, and it was the kind of grin that made sensible people run for cover. "We're going to confuse them to death." The next 9 minutes were a blur of controlled chaos that would go down in diplomatic history as either the most brilliant tactical maneuver ever conceived or the luckiest accident in the galaxy. Riley had Dr. Pemberton jury-rigged the broken coffee machine to create random electromagnetic pulses. She had Martinez patch those pulses into the station's communication array. And she had every Zephyrian on the station synchronize their bioluminescent patterns to create the most complicated light show in recorded history. "What is this supposed to accomplish?" General Thex Null asked, watching his dignified diplomatic station turn into something that looked like a disco ball having a seizure. "The Krillians are military," Riley explained, frantically adjusting settings on equipment she barely understood. "Military means predictable. They've studied every known defensive pattern, every standard evasive maneuver, every logical tactical response. And this is logical. This is the opposite of logical. This is pure, concentrated, weaponized confusion." The Krillian fleet arrived exactly on schedule, ready to destroy another diplomatic meeting with ruthless efficiency. What they found instead was a space station broadcasting seemingly random electromagnetic signatures while flashing in patterns that hurt to look at and defied every known communication protocol. For exactly 37 seconds, the Krillian fleet commander tried to analyze what he was seeing. His tactical computers crashed. His communication officers reported that the signals seemed to be some kind of code, but a code based on no known mathematical principles. The light patterns appeared to be a warning system, but for what? Then Commander Riley Murphy opened a communication channel and said, in the most serious voice she could manage, "Attention, Krillian fleet. You have entered a quarantine zone. This station is currently experiencing a cascading logic virus that affects all rational thought processes. Recommend immediate withdrawal to prevent contamination." There was no such thing as a cascading logic virus. Riley had made it up on the spot. But the Krillians, faced with a completely incomprehensible situation that made no tactical sense whatsoever, did what military minds always do when confronted with the unknown. They retreated. "That was impossible," General Thex Null said, staring at the tactical display showing the Krillian fleet jumping to hyperspace. That was Tuesday, Riley replied. You should see what I can do with a full week and a really good cup of coffee. 3 weeks later, Admiral Torres sat in his office reading the most unusual diplomatic report in stellar command history. According to Captain Martinez's meticulously documented account, Commander Riley Murphy had successfully established formal relations with the Zephyrian Empire, created the first interspecies cultural exchange program, accidentally discovered that terrible jokes were a universal constant, and saved 2 civilizations using nothing but a broken coffee machine and weaponized confusion. The report was 37 pages long and included footnotes like Commander Murphy's definition of diplomatic protocol appears to be whatever seems like a good idea at the time, and requesting immediate hazard pay for future missions with Murphy. But the results spoke for themselves. The Zephyrians hadn't just agreed to an alliance, they'd declared humans their favorite species in the galaxy. Their exact words, according to the translation matrix, were because they make everything interesting. The Krillian Imperium, meanwhile, had issued a formal statement declaring the entire human Zephyrian alliance a tactical impossibility and advised all their military commanders to avoid engaging with humans until further study could be completed. So Admiral Torres said as Riley walked into his office, still looking pleased with herself, I understand congratulations are in order. Thank you, sir. Though to be fair, I had a lot of help. Turns out the universe is way more fun when you don't take it too seriously. Torres held up the report. According to Captain Martinez, you violated approximately 47 different diplomatic protocols, caused 3 separate translation failures, and at one point accidentally proposed marriage to an entire alien government. It was only 12 council members, sir, and I think they were flattered. Murphy, in any sane universe, this mission should have been a complete disaster. Riley grinned. Good thing we don't live in a sane universe, sir. Torres leaned back in his chair. The High Command has reviewed your unconventional methods. They've decided to create a new position in the diplomatic corps, Chief of Unconventional Diplomacy. That sounds made up. It is made up. We made it up specifically for you. Congratulations, you're now in charge of all the diplomatic situations that are too weird, too dangerous, or too impossible for normal diplomats to handle. Riley's eyes lit up. Does this mean I get to keep breaking all the rules? Murphy, you're going to rewrite the rules. The Andorian Republic has been trying to make contact for 50 years, but they communicate entirely through interpretive dance. The crystalline collective speaks only in mathematical equations that make quantum physicists cry. And don't get me started on the hive mind that insists on conducting all negotiations through limerick. Limerick diplomacy. I like it already. Torres smiled grimly. Your first mission launches tomorrow. The transport ship, Absolutely Nothing Can Go Wrong, will take you to the vegan system, where you'll attempt to establish relations with a species that appears to communicate entirely through the medium of cooking. Cooking diplomacy. Even better. Riley paused. Sir, did you really name a ship Absolutely Nothing Can Go Wrong? That was Captain Martinez's idea. He said with you aboard, we might as well embrace the chaos. Riley stood up, already mentally planning her next spectacular violation of everything resembling proper procedure. Well, sir, I promise you one thing. What's that, Murphy? It's going to be interesting. And as Commander Riley Murphy walked out of Admiral Torres' office, already planning how to conduct interstellar relations through the ancient art of competitive cooking, the universe shifted slightly on its axis. Because somewhere out there in the vast darkness of space, impossible things were waiting to happen, and humanity had finally found the perfect person to make them possible. After all, the galaxy was full of species that followed the rules, stuck to protocols, and did things the way they'd always been done. But there was only one species crazy enough to throw out the playbook entirely and see what happened next. And that made all the difference.